Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Rob Mitchell stood in his corner office on the 32nd floor, watching the Seattle skyline fade into twilight. At 38, he had built Mitchell Strategic Solutions from nothing into a $50 million consulting empire. The irony wasn't lost on him that tonight, his 5th wedding anniversary, he was still working while his wife Victoria prepared for their celebration dinner with her family. Rob's journey hadn't been easy. Born to a single mother in Tacoma, he'd clawed his way through community college and state university on scholarships and grit. While his classmates partied, he'd worked 3 jobs and studied until his eyes burned. His mother, Linda, had died of cancer just before his graduation, leaving him with nothing but debt and determination. The business started in his studio apartment. Just him, a laptop, and an unshakable belief that mid-sized companies needed better strategic guidance. His breakthrough came when he helped a struggling manufacturing firm increase efficiency by 300% in 6 months. Word spread, clients multiplied, and within 5 years, he was consulting for Fortune 500 companies. That's when he met Victoria Harrington at a charity gala. She was everything he'd never had: elegant, cultured, connected. The daughter of Theodore Harrington, Seattle's real estate mogul, she seemed genuinely interested in his work, his ambitions. Their whirlwind courtship felt like a fairy tale to a man who'd never known privilege. The wedding was spectacular, a $200,000 affair at the Harrington estate that made all the society pages. Rob had been naive enough to believe it was love. Victoria's father, Ted, had been welcoming, even offering to invest in Rob's expanding business. When Rob politely declined, preferring to maintain control, Ted had smiled and said, "Smart man. Keep your independence." Now, 5 years later, Rob employed 43 people and had offices in 3 cities. Victoria worked as his chief marketing officer, a position Rob had created for her, though her contributions were minimal. She preferred shopping trips to strategy sessions, charity events to client meetings. Tonight's anniversary dinner was at Canlis, Victoria's choice. She'd insisted on inviting her parents and her younger brother Kyle. "Family is everything," she'd said, kissing his cheek that morning. "We should celebrate with the people who matter most." Rob straightened his tie and grabbed his jacket. He'd worked late to finish reviewing contracts for their newest client, a hotel chain looking to expand internationally. It was a $3 million deal that would put them in the big leagues. At Canlis, the Harrington family was already seated at their usual table, the one with the perfect view of Elliott Bay. Theodore Harrington, 62 and imposing despite his slight frame, rose to shake Rob's hand. His wife, Patricia, offered her cheek for Rob's obligatory kiss. Kyle, 28 and perpetually unemployed despite his trust fund, barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry I'm late," Rob said, taking his seat beside Victoria. She looked stunning in a black dress he'd bought her in Paris, her blonde hair perfectly styled. The Morrison deal needed final review. Morrison Hotel Group. Ted's eyes sharpened with interest. "That's quite a coup, Robert. International expansion, 12 properties across Europe initially, with options for 20 more," Rob replied, noting how Victoria's father always perked up when big money was discussed. Victoria squeezed Rob's hand. "My brilliant husband. Always landing the impossible deals." Dinner proceeded with its usual rhythm. Ted dominating conversation with stories of his latest real estate acquisitions, Patricia discussing her charity board drama, Kyle making snide comments about people who actually work for a living. Rob had learned to tune out most of it, focusing instead on Victoria's laugh, the way she touched his arm when she spoke. "I should mention," Ted said as dessert arrived, "I've been talking to some investors about opportunities in the consulting space. The market's hot right now." Rob set down his fork. "What kind of opportunities?" "Oh, nothing specific. Just conversations. You know how it is, always keeping an ear to the ground." Ted's smile was casual, but Rob caught something in his eyes. "Though I did hear Brett Sullivan is looking to expand his operations." Victoria's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her wine glass. The name meant nothing to Rob, but clearly it meant something to her. "Who's Brett Sullivan?" Rob asked. "Runs a business consulting firm in Portland," Ted replied. "Growing fast. We might introduce you sometime. Could be mutually beneficial." The conversation moved on, but Rob found himself studying Victoria's face. She'd recovered her composure, but he'd seen that flash of, "What?" Recognition? Nervousness? His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Morrison contracts signed and filed. Congratulations on the biggest deal in company history. Rob smiled and raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted at their table. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The following weeks brought a subtle change in Victoria's behavior that Rob couldn't quite define. She'd always been social, but now she seemed constantly busy with meetings and lunch appointments that kept her away from the office for hours. When Rob asked about her marketing initiatives, she'd deflect with vague mentions of networking and brand building. More troubling were the late-night phone calls. Victoria had always been a light sleeper, but now she'd slip out of bed when her phone buzzed, taking hushed conversations in the kitchen or their home office. When confronted, she claimed it was her sister calling about their mother's health issues. Rob's suspicions crystallized 3 weeks after their anniversary dinner when he returned early from a client meeting in Vancouver. Victoria's car was in the driveway, but the house felt empty. He found her in their bedroom, hastily closing her laptop. "You're back early," she said, her smile too bright. "Flight was ahead of schedule. What are you working on?" "Just some charity event planning." "Very boring." She closed the laptop completely. "How was Vancouver?" Rob studied her face, the slight flush, the way she avoided his eyes. "Productive. The tech startup wants to retain us for their IPO preparation." "That's wonderful, darling." Victoria kissed his cheek and headed for the bathroom. "I'm meeting Mom for dinner. Don't wait up." That night, alone in his home office, Rob made a decision that would have seemed paranoid just months earlier. He installed discreet monitoring software on their shared household devices and hired a private investigator, not to follow Victoria, but to research Brett Sullivan. The PI's initial report arrived within days. Brett Sullivan, 35, ran Sullivan and Associates, a Portland-based consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring and acquisitions. Divorced, no children, known for aggressive business tactics. Most interesting, he'd been making frequent trips to Seattle over the past 6 months. Rob dug deeper into Sullivan's background. The man was impressive, Stanford MBA, former McKinsey consultant, built his firm from nothing much like Rob had. But there was a ruthless edge to Sullivan's success stories. Companies that hired him often ended up sold or dramatically restructured, with original leadership pushed out. The pieces began forming a picture Rob didn't want to see. His investigation took on new urgency when Victoria announced she'd be attending a marketing conference in Portland the following weekend. Rob knew of no such conference, but he smiled and wished her well. That Friday evening, as Victoria packed her overnight bag, Rob's phone rang. It was Marcus Webb, his head of operations and one of his few true friends. "Rob, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the office?" Marcus was waiting in Rob's office, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. "I've been hearing things," he said without preamble. "Rumors about a potential buyout. Someone's been asking questions about our client list, our financials." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest due diligence. And there's something else. I saw your father-in-law having lunch with some guys in expensive suits yesterday. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I recognized one of them from a photo in Forbes. He's a partner at Silverman and Associates." Rob knew the name. Silverman was one of Seattle's most prestigious investment firms, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me, and I need your word that it stays between us." His friend nodded grimly. "Start documenting everything, every client interaction, every financial record, every decision I've made. Create backups of all our critical data and store them somewhere off-site. And if anyone approaches you about the company, I want to know immediately." That weekend, while Victoria was supposedly in Portland, Rob drove past her favorite spa, her usual shopping haunts, even her parents' house. Her car was nowhere to be found. Sunday evening, she returned home with shopping bags from stores that had no locations in Portland. "How was the conference?" Rob asked casually. "Informative. Lots of new digital marketing trends." Victoria unpacked clothes that still had Seattle store tags partially removed. Rob said nothing, but that night he called his attorney, not the family lawyer who'd handled their prenup, but Sarah Kim, a cutthroat corporate attorney he'd met through business circles. "I need you to review something," he told her. "My prenuptial agreement. I want to understand exactly what protections I have regarding my business." "Rob, is everything all right?" Let's just say I want to be prepared for any possibility. Sarah's review was sobering. The prenup protected Rob's premarital assets, but was vague about business growth during the marriage. If Victoria could prove she'd contributed to the company's success, which her position as CMO might suggest, she could potentially claim a significant stake. Worse, Sarah explained, Washington is a community property state. If she can establish that the business grew substantially during your marriage due to joint efforts, the court might view it as marital property regardless of the prenup. And if she's having an affair? Infidelity doesn't affect property division in Washington. You'd need to prove fraud or some other malfeasance. Rob thanked Sarah and hung up, his mind racing. He was being played by his wife, possibly by her father, definitely by someone who understood the legal landscape better than he'd given them credit for. That night, he made another call to his PI. I want full surveillance on my wife. Every meeting, every phone call you can legally monitor, everyone she talks to. And I want to know everything about Brett Sullivan's business, his clients, his methods, his financials. Rob, the PI said carefully, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. Rob thought about everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for since his mother's death. I'm not the kind of man who chooses bliss over truth. As he hung up, Victoria appeared in the doorway in her silk pajamas, beautiful and treacherous. Who were you talking to, honey? Just Marcus. We have a big week ahead. She smiled and kissed his forehead. My hardworking husband. Don't stay up too late. Rob watched her walk away and realized he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Chapter 3. The Overheard Truth. Rob's suspicions reached a breaking point 2 weeks later when Victoria suggested they celebrate their anniversary a month late with dinner at the exclusive Harbor Club. Dad wants to discuss some investment opportunities with you, she'd said. He thinks it might be time to bring in some strategic partners. The Harbor Club was Theodore Harrington's domain, an old money establishment where Seattle's elite conducted business over $30 stakes. Rob had always felt like an outsider there, despite his success. Tonight, that feeling intensified as Ted held court at their private dining room, joined by Patricia and Kyle. During cocktails, Ted was unusually expansive about Rob's achievements. You've built something remarkable, Robert. From nothing to $50 million in revenue. That takes vision. Thank you, Ted. Of course, sustaining growth at that level requires different skills. Sometimes founders need to evolve their role as companies mature. Rob caught the subtle message but said nothing. Throughout dinner, the conversation kept circling back to business strategy, market consolidation, the benefits of strategic partnerships. Victoria seemed unusually quiet, contributing little beyond encouraging smiles. Coffee had just been served when Rob's phone rang. The caller ID showed his biggest client, Morrison Hotel CEO, calling about an urgent issue with their European expansion timeline. I'm sorry, but I need to take this, Rob said, stepping toward the door. Use the side office, Ted suggested. More private. Rob walked down the hallway to a small office Ted sometimes used for business calls. As he discussed Morrison's concerns, he could hear the family conversation continuing in the dining room through the thin walls. He was about to close the office door when Ted's voice stopped him cold. Too dumb for this business. You need to take control. Rob's blood froze. He moved closer to the wall, keeping his voice low as he wrapped up the call. Victoria's voice came clearly. I will, Dad. The board is already on my side to vote him out Monday. Good girl. Brett's put together a solid transition plan. Once you're CEO, the Sullivan merger can proceed. Rob will get his buyout money and fade away like he should have years ago. What about the employees? Kyle's voice, uncharacteristically serious. Some will stay, some won't. That's business, Ted replied coldly. The important thing is consolidating the client relationships under proper management. Patricia's voice. Are you sure Brett can handle the integration? He's not exactly stable. He's stable enough to triple our investment, Ted shot back. And Victoria knows how to manage him. Victoria laughed, a sound Rob had never heard before, calculating and cold. Brett's easy to control. Rob never was. This way, we get the business and I get a husband who actually understands power. Rob's hand tightened on his phone as the conversation continued. The prenup won't be a problem? Ted asked. Sarah Kim already explained the loopholes. As CMO, I can claim substantial contribution to company growth. Washington's community property laws will do the rest. Between that and the board vote, Rob will have no choice but to accept our offer. And if he fights? Victoria's voice turned vicious. Then we destroy him. Brett has connections Rob doesn't. We can make sure he never gets another major client in this city. Rob realized they were wrapping up their conversation. He quickly finished his call and composed his face into a neutral expression. When he returned to the dining room, the family was discussing dessert options as if they hadn't just planned his professional assassination. Everything all right with Morrison? Victoria asked sweetly. Just timeline adjustments. Nothing we can't handle. Ted smiled. That's what I admire about you, Robert. Always confident in your ability to handle things. Rob stood and raised his glass of wine, his smile matching Ted's for calculation. To new beginnings, he said, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Victoria clinked her glass against his, her expression loving and supportive. To new beginnings. The ride home was quiet. Victoria seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at Rob with an expression he now recognized as appraisal rather than affection. When they reached their house, a $2.3 million property in Bellevue that Rob had bought with his own money, she kissed his cheek and said she was tired. Big day tomorrow, she murmured. Yes, Rob agreed. Very big. Alone in his home office, Rob opened his laptop and began making calls. First to Marcus Webb. Emergency meeting, 6 a.m. tomorrow. Conference room. Bring Jennifer from legal and Tom from finance. Next, to Sarah Kim. I need an emergency restraining order preventing any board action until we can review the company bylaws. Yes, I know it's Sunday night. Third, to his PI. I need everything you have on Brett Sullivan by tomorrow morning. Everything. Finally, to his personal banker. I need to discuss moving some assets into protected accounts. Rob leaned back in his chair, staring at the family photo on his desk, him and Victoria on their wedding day, both smiling brilliantly. He'd been so proud that day, convinced he'd finally found someone who loved him for who he was rather than what he could provide. Now he understood the truth. Victoria had never loved him. She'd studied him, learned his weaknesses, identified his vulnerabilities, positioned herself to take everything he'd built. But Victoria and her family had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed Rob was the same naive man who'd fallen for a beautiful woman at a charity gala. They'd mistaken his kindness for weakness, his love for stupidity. They were about to learn the difference. Rob opened a secure document on his computer and began typing. Operation New Beginnings, Strategic Response Plan. By dawn, he would be ready for war. Chapter 4, The War Room. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Rob's mood as he entered his office building at 5:30 a.m. The weekend had been a performance worthy of an Oscar. He'd maintained his usual demeanor with Victoria, discussed their upcoming vacation plans, even made love to her Sunday night, while she whispered promises she had no intention of keeping. Marcus Webb was already waiting in the conference room with Jennifer Park, their in-house counsel, and Tom Russell, their CFO. All three looked concerned but alert. Thank you for coming in early, Rob began, closing the door. What I'm about to tell you stays in this room. Our company is under attack. He laid out everything. Victoria's betrayal, the planned board coup, Brett Sullivan's involvement, Ted Harrington's coordination. By the time he finished, Jennifer was pale and Tom was furiously taking notes. How is this possible? Marcus asked. You control 60% of the board. I thought I did. Rob pulled out a folder. I spent the weekend reviewing our corporate structure. When we incorporated 5 years ago, I retained 60% ownership but created 7 board seats. I hold 3 directly. Victoria holds 1 as CMO. Ted Harrington holds 1 as our largest outside investor. The remaining 2 went to what I thought were independent directors. Jennifer's eyes widened. They're not independent. Douglas Chun, our financial advisor. Turns out he's been Ted's golf partner for 20 years. Amanda Foster from Foster Marketing. Her firm has been getting referrals from Ted's real estate business for the past 3 years. Tom whistled low. So if Victoria, Ted, Chun, and Foster vote together, 4 votes to my 3. They can remove me as CEO and accept any buyout offer they choose. Rob's voice was controlled, but his anger was evident. Victoria will become CEO, Sullivan's firm will acquire us, and I'll be forced to accept whatever they offer. Can we challenge this legally? Jennifer asked. Sarah Kim is working on it, but Washington corporate law is clear. The board has broad authority to make these decisions if they can prove it's in the company's best interest. Marcus stood up, pacing. This is insane. You built this company. These people have contributed nothing. Actually, that's not entirely true. Rob pulled out another document. Victoria's been more clever than I gave her credit for. Over the past year, she's been documenting every marketing initiative, every client event, every strategic discussion she's been part of. On paper, she looks like a significant contributor to our growth. But she barely does any actual work, Tom protested. Irrelevant. She can claim credit for relationship building, strategic marketing, client retention. The legal system doesn't measure effort. It measures documented contribution. Jennifer leaned forward. What about the prenup? Protects my personal assets, but not the business growth during our marriage. Victoria's lawyers could argue that the company's expansion from 20 million to 50 million happened because of joint efforts. The room fell silent. Finally, Marcus spoke. So what do we do? Rob smiled for the first time that morning. We remind everyone why I built this company in the first place. Tom, I need you to create a complete audit trail of every major decision over the past 5 years. Who initiated what? Who executed what? Who delivered results? Jennifer, research every contract Victoria signed, every client she supposedly brought in. I want proof of actual contribution versus claimed contribution. And then we play their game, but better. Rob turned to Marcus. You know our clients better than anyone. How many would follow us if we started fresh? Marcus considered. Morrison for sure. You personally saved their expansion. The tech startups we've helped go public. They're loyal to you, not the company name. Probably 60% of our revenue would move with us. Good. Start making discreet inquiries. Don't make promises. Just gauge interest in a new firm led by me with you as operations director. Rob, Jennifer said carefully, you're talking about competing with your own company. There might be non-compete clauses. In my employment contract with myself? Rob's smile was predatory. I wrote those contracts, Jennifer. I know exactly what they do and don't say. Tom looked troubled. What about Victoria? And the board meeting? Let them have their vote. Let Victoria become CEO of Mitchell Strategic Solutions. Rob stood up, moving to the window overlooking downtown Seattle. While she's playing queen of an empty castle, I'll be building something they can never touch. The meeting broke up with assignments for everyone. As the others left, Marcus hung back. Rob, there's something else. My contact at Silverman & Associates called me over the weekend. They wanted to know about our client retention rates, our employee satisfaction scores. They're definitely preparing a valuation. What did you tell them? That they'd need to talk to you directly. But Rob, Marcus hesitated. The questions they asked suggest they're planning to gut the company. Strip out the profitable clients, sell off the assets, probably lay off half the staff. Rob nodded grimly. Ted Harrington doesn't care about the business or the people. He just wants the asset value and client relationships. So we're really doing this? Starting over. Rob thought about his mother, working 3 jobs to support them, never complaining, never giving up. He thought about building his first company with nothing but determination and a laptop. Most of all, he thought about Victoria's voice saying he was too dumb for this business. Marcus, 5 years ago, I built a $50 million company from nothing. You think I can't do it again? But this time they'll be fighting us. Victoria, Sullivan, Ted, they have resources. They have money. I have something better. I have the clients who actually matter, the employees who actually work, and the knowledge of exactly how this business really operates. Rob turned from the window. Besides, they made one critical error. What's that? They underestimated what I'm willing to do when someone tries to steal from me. That afternoon, Rob attended his company's board meeting with a calm smile. Victoria sat beside him, playing the supportive wife, while Ted Harrington and the other directors filed in. The agenda was routine, quarterly financials, client updates, strategic planning discussions. But Rob could see the anticipation in Victoria's eyes, the way Ted kept checking his watch. They were waiting for something, probably Brett Sullivan's call with the formal acquisition offer. Before we adjourn, Ted said as the meeting wound down, I'd like to discuss some strategic opportunities that have come to our attention. Of course, Rob replied. I'm always interested in growth opportunities. Victoria squeezed his hand under the table, her touch now making his skin crawl. Actually, Rob continued, I've been doing some strategic thinking myself. I'd like to schedule a special board meeting for Friday to discuss some significant changes to our company structure. Ted's eyebrows rose. What kind of changes? The kind that will ensure Mitchell Strategic Solutions reaches its full potential, Rob said smoothly. I think you'll all be very interested in what I have to propose. As the meeting ended and directors filed out, Victoria lingered. What are you planning for Friday? She asked, her tone carefully casual. Rob kissed her forehead, the gesture now purely performative. Just some ideas I've been working on. I think it's time for some new beginnings. That evening, while Victoria took another mysterious phone call in their kitchen, Rob finalized the documents that would change everything. By Friday, Victoria and her co-conspirators would get exactly what they'd planned for, control of Mitchell Strategic Solutions. They just wouldn't realize until it was too late that they'd be inheriting an empty shell. Chapter 5. The Setup. Wednesday brought an unexpected development that accelerated Rob's timeline. Victoria announced she'd be flying to Portland again for follow-up meetings from the conference, despite having attended no actual conference the first time. It's a great networking opportunity, she said over breakfast, not meeting his eyes. Some potential partnerships that could really benefit the company. Partnerships with whom? Oh, various firms. You know how these things work. Lots of exploratory conversations. Rob nodded sympathetically while mentally noting this would give him uninterrupted access to Victoria's home office. How long will you be gone? Just overnight. Back Thursday evening. Perfect. That gave him 24 hours to execute the most crucial phase of his plan. After Victoria left for the airport, Rob made several key phone calls. First, to Marcus. Operation New Beginnings is a go. We're accelerating the timeline. What do you need? Meet me at the office tonight. Bring Tom and Jennifer, and make sure you're not followed. We're going to do something that's either brilliant or completely insane. Knowing you, probably both. Next, Rob called his personal attorney Sarah Kim. I need those incorporation papers we discussed, filed immediately. And Sarah, absolute confidentiality. If anyone asks, including my wife, you've never heard of Phoenix Strategic Group. Rob, are you sure about this? What you're proposing is legal, but ruthless. Yes, I know. File the papers. The final call went to his private investigator. I need everything you have on Brett Sullivan, and I need one more favor. Can you arrange for someone to document his activities tonight? Specifically, if he meets with a blonde woman around 35. That evening, Rob, Marcus, Tom, and Jennifer worked until 3 a.m. in the empty office building. By dawn Thursday, they had quietly transferred all critical client files, strategic documents, and proprietary systems to secure servers owned by Phoenix Strategic Group, a company that existed only on paper but was 100% owned by Rob Mitchell. The beauty of this, Rob explained as they finished, is that we're not stealing anything. We're copying information that I created, using systems I paid for a company I own. If anyone challenges it, they'll have to prove the information belongs exclusively to Mitchell Strategic Solutions. Jennifer looked exhausted but impressed. And since you wrote most of the employment contracts and corporate policies, I made sure to retain rights to any intellectual property I personally developed. Victoria's lawyers will spend months trying to untangle what belongs to whom. Tom was reviewing financial transfers on his laptop. The client retainer accounts are interesting. Technically, that money belongs to whoever is providing the services. Exactly. If Phoenix Strategic Group takes over service delivery for clients who choose to switch, the retainer money follows the work. Rob smiled grimly. Mitchell Strategic can keep the office lease and the furniture. I'll keep the actual business. Thursday evening, Victoria returned from Portland with shopping bags and stories about productive meetings. Rob listened attentively while noting that she seemed nervous, checking her phone constantly. Everything all right? He asked. Of course. Just excited about some of the opportunities we discussed. I think you'll be very pleased with what might develop. I'm sure I will. That night, as Victoria slept beside him, Rob received a text from his PI. Subject met with male companion at downtown Portland hotel. Intimate relationship confirmed. Full documentation available. Rob deleted the text and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow's board meeting would change everything, but first he needed to make one final move. Friday morning, Rob left the house early under the pretense of preparing for the board meeting. Instead, he drove to a coffee shop across from Brett Sullivan's Seattle hotel, the Grand Hyatt, where Victoria had apparently been meeting him during her marketing conferences. Sullivan emerged at 8:30 a.m., and Rob got his first look at the man who'd been sleeping with his wife and planning to steal his company. Tall, athletic, expensively dressed. Everything Victoria probably thought she deserved instead of a self-made man from Tacoma. Rob followed Sullivan's taxi to Mitchell Strategic's building, watching from across the street as Victoria met him in the lobby. They embraced longer than business associates should, and Rob felt the last of his emotional attachment to his wife die completely. Now it was just business. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:45, Rob entered the conference room to find Victoria, Ted, and the other directors already assembled. Brett Sullivan sat at the far end of the table, apparently as a consulting advisor. "I hope you don't mind," Victoria said with false sweetness, "but I invited Brett to observe. His insights into strategic partnerships could be valuable." "Of course," Rob replied, taking his seat. "I'm always interested in outside perspectives." Ted called the meeting to order and immediately yielded the floor to Victoria. "I'd like to propose," she said, "that this board consider a strategic partnership opportunity that's been presented to us. Brett's firm, Sullivan and Associates, has offered to acquire Mitchell Strategic Solutions for $65 million, with a management structure that would position us for accelerated growth." Rob listened as Victoria laid out the proposal, exactly what he'd expected based on the overheard conversation. Sullivan would acquire the company. Victoria would remain as CEO. Existing clients would be integrated into Sullivan's broader platform. "The offer is generous," Ted added, "and provides immediate liquidity for all shareholders while maintaining growth potential." Douglas Chun and Amanda Foster nodded enthusiastically. Brett Sullivan smiled confidently. "It's an intriguing proposal," Rob said calmly, "but I have a counter-proposal that I think the board should consider." Victoria's confident expression flickered slightly. "I propose that we restructure Mitchell Strategic Solutions entirely. Spin off the core consulting services into a new entity, liquidate non-essential assets, and distribute the proceeds to shareholders." "That's," Ted began, but Rob continued. "The restructuring would be effective immediately, with clients given the option to continue services through the new entity or seek alternative providers." "Robert," Victoria said, her voice sharp, "that's not in the best interests of the company." "Actually, it is. You see, I've spent the past week analyzing our true value proposition. It turns out that most of our client relationships, intellectual property, and revenue generation capabilities are tied to specific individuals rather than the corporate entity." Brett Sullivan leaned forward. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Rob smiled. "I'm suggesting that Mitchell Strategic Solutions, as a corporate entity, has very little value beyond its name and office lease. The real value lies in the people and relationships, which aren't included in any acquisition." The room went silent as the implications sank in. "In fact," Rob continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Phoenix Strategic Group, a new firm I've established, has already signed letters of intent with clients representing 73% of Mitchell Strategic's revenue." Victoria's face went white. "You can't do that." "Actually, I can. And I have." Rob placed a stack of documents on the table. "These are signed service agreements with Morrison Hotels, Davidson Tech, Premier Manufacturing, and 15 other clients. They've chosen to continue their consulting relationships with Phoenix Strategic, effective Monday." Ted Harrington's voice was dangerous. "You're talking about corporate sabotage. I'm talking about free market competition. These clients had the right to choose their service provider. They chose me." Brett Sullivan stood up abruptly. "This is highly unethical." "Mr. Sullivan," Rob said pleasantly, "I don't believe ethics is a subject you're qualified to discuss, particularly given your relationship with my wife." The room exploded into chaos. Victoria jumped to her feet. Ted began shouting about lawsuits, and Brett Sullivan looked like he wanted to punch something. Rob remained seated, calm in the storm he'd created. "The board has a choice," he said when the noise died down. "You can accept Sullivan's acquisition offer for what will essentially be an empty shell company, or you can vote for my restructuring proposal and salvage some value for shareholders." "This is blackmail," Victoria snarled. "This is business," Rob corrected. "The kind you apparently thought I was too dumb to understand." The vote was exactly what Rob had expected: 4 against his proposal, 3 in favor. Victoria had her coup, Ted had his acquisition, and Brett Sullivan had his prize. They just didn't realize yet that they'd won a hollow victory. As the meeting ended and directors filed out in various states of rage and confusion, Victoria lingered. "How could you do this to us?" she asked, tears in her eyes. Rob looked at her, really looked at her, for what he knew would be the last time as her husband. "Victoria, you've been planning to betray me for months. You're sleeping with another man and plotting to steal my company. The question isn't how I could do this to you. The question is how you could do this to yourself. I never wanted to hurt you. No, you just wanted to destroy me. There's a difference." Rob gathered his papers and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Victoria called after him. "To build something new. Something you can't touch." "Rob, wait. We can work this out. We can fix this." He paused at the doorway without turning around. "Victoria, there are some things that can't be fixed. Our marriage is one of them." Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The weekend that followed the board meeting was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Victoria alternated between tears, rage, and desperate attempts at seduction. She promised to leave Brett, claimed she'd been manipulated by her father, even offered to help Rob rebuild the company they'd just destroyed. Rob listened to it all with clinical detachment, playing the role of wounded husband while internally cataloging every lie, every manipulation, every false promise. By Sunday evening, Victoria seemed convinced she was making progress in salvaging their marriage. "I know you're angry," she said over dinner at their kitchen table, "but we can get through this. We always have." "Have we?" Rob asked quietly. "When exactly have we gotten through anything together, Victoria? Because looking back, I can't think of a single real challenge we've faced as partners. When did you try to talk to me about restructuring our company or changing our marriage?" Victoria couldn't answer because they both knew she'd never tried. She'd decided he was an obstacle and worked to remove him rather than communicate with him. "I think," Rob said quietly, "it's time for us to discuss divorce." "Rob, no. We can fix this." "Victoria, you can't fix something you deliberately broke." That night, as Victoria cried herself to sleep, Rob finalized the documents that would complete his revenge. By morning, everything would be ready. The trap had been carefully constructed over weeks of planning. Now it was time to spring it. Chapter 7. The Execution. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable sunshine, as if the weather itself wanted to mock the storm about to break over Seattle's business district. Rob dressed carefully in his best suit, the charcoal Armani that Victoria had bought him for their 3rd anniversary, when she still believed their marriage had value beyond her family's ambitions. Phoenix Strategic Group's offices buzzed with controlled energy. In just 2 weeks, they'd signed 16 major clients, hired 8 key employees from Mitchell Strategic, and established operational systems that ran more efficiently than the company they'd left behind. Rob's gamble was paying off spectacularly. At 9 a.m. sharp, Rob called Victoria. "Good morning, darling. How's your first Monday as permanent CEO?" Victoria's voice was strained. "Challenging. We're still working through some client transition issues." "I'm sorry to hear that. Anything I can help with?" "Actually, yes. Morrison Hotels is threatening to terminate their contract unless they can work directly with you. Their CEO says the service quality has dropped significantly." Rob smiled. Morrison's CEO, David Chun, was a personal friend who'd built his hotel empire from a single property in Portland. Chun understood loyalty and had zero tolerance for corporate games. "That's unfortunate. What did you tell him?" "That we're fully capable of handling his account without your involvement." "And his response?" "He hung up on me." "Victoria, Morrison represents 12% of Mitchell Strategic's revenue. Can you afford to lose them?" "We won't lose them. Brett has connections in the hospitality industry." "I'm sure he does." "Speaking of Brett, how's the integration going?" There was a long pause. "There have been some personality conflicts with the existing staff." Rob knew exactly what those conflicts were. Brett Sullivan's management style was authoritarian and condescending, fine for acquiring companies and liquidating assets, disastrous for managing creative professionals who could quit anytime they wanted. "Well, I'm sure you'll work it out. You're very good at managing difficult personalities." "Rob, we need to talk. In person. Tonight." "Of course. Should I come to the office, or would you prefer somewhere more private?" "Home. After work. There are things we need to discuss." Rob spent the day putting final touches on a plan that had taken weeks to develop. At 3 p.m., He received the call he'd been waiting for. Mr. Mitchell? This is Sarah Kim. Everything's in place. All the documents. Filed and ready. Once you give the word, it's irreversible. And the other matter? Your PI delivered the package this morning. Morrison, Davidson Tech, and Premier Manufacturing all received copies. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. At 6 p.m., Rob drove home to find Victoria pacing in their living room, still wearing her business suit, but looking disheveled in a way he'd never seen before. Brett Sullivan sat on their couch, looking equally strained. I hope you don't mind, Victoria said without preamble, but Brett wanted to be here for this conversation. Not at all. This affects all of us. Rob took his usual chair, the leather recliner that faced the couch, and waited. Victoria sat beside Brett, close enough to touch, but not touching. Even in crisis, she was calculating the optics. Rob, we need to end this war before it destroys everything we've all worked for. What war? I thought we were having healthy business competition. Brett leaned forward. You know exactly what you're doing. Poaching clients, stealing employees, undermining our operations. It's corporate sabotage. It's capitalism. Clients choose their service providers. Employees choose their employers. I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. You're leveraging personal relationships to damage our business. Rob's smile was arctic. Brett, you leveraged a personal relationship to steal my business and my wife. I'm just better at it than you are. Victoria flinched. That's not what happened. Then explain to me what did happen. Because from where I sit, you conspired with your father to vote me out of my own company, planned to install your lover as my replacement, and expected me to quietly accept being robbed. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Victoria said, tears starting. You were supposed to take the buyout money and start something new. Everyone would have won. Except I would have been forced out of the industry I created, you would have stolen the company I built, and Brett would have gotten both my business and my wife. Yes, everyone would have won except me. Brett stood up abruptly. This is pointless. Mitchell, I'm making you one final offer. Withdraw from competing with Mitchell Strategic, sign a 5-year non-compete agreement, and we'll pay you $10 million. That's generous. What's the catch? No catch. Clean break. Everyone moves on. Rob pretended to consider it. $10 million to disappear from the consulting business entirely? For 5 years. After that, you can do whatever you want. And Phoenix Strategic? Shut it down. We'll absorb any clients who want to stay in the market. Victoria was watching Rob's face intently, hope flickering in her eyes. It's a fair offer, she said. More than fair. Rob nodded slowly. You're right. It is fair. There's just one problem. What? I already turned down a better offer. The room went silent. What are you talking about? Brett demanded. Rob pulled out his phone and scrolled to a specific email. This morning, Morrison Hotels offered me $20 million to become their exclusive strategic advisor. Davidson Tech offered $15 million plus equity for the same arrangement. Premier Manufacturing's offer was $12 million. Victoria's face went white. That's not possible. Actually, it's inevitable. You see, when clients receive documented evidence that their current service provider acquired them through deception and corporate manipulation, they tend to look for alternatives. Brett was on his feet now. What evidence? The kind that shows how you orchestrated the acquisition of Mitchell Strategic specifically to access their client relationships. The kind that details your affair with the CEO and your coordination with her father to manipulate board votes. You can't prove any of that. Rob smiled. Actually, I can. I have recordings of the Harbor Club conversation where you planned the coup. I have documentation of your hotel meetings with Victoria. I have financial records showing Ted Harrington's coordination with other board members. Victoria stood up, shaking. You recorded us? I protected myself. Something I should have done years ago. Brett was pacing now, his composure completely gone. This is extortion. This is disclosure. Those clients had a right to know they were being manipulated. We'll sue you for interference with business relationships. Go ahead. Discovery will be fascinating. All those emails between you and Victoria, all those planning sessions with Ted Harrington, all those secret meetings in Portland hotels. Victoria sank back onto the couch. Rob, what do you want? I want what I've already gotten. My self-respect, my business relationships, and my freedom from this marriage. So you'll divorce me and destroy my company out of spite? Rob stood up and walked to the window overlooking their backyard. The garden Victoria had never planted, the pool she'd never used, the life they'd never actually shared. Victoria, I'm not destroying your company. You are. You staged a coup without understanding what you were actually acquiring. You brought in a partner who sees employees as disposable assets and clients as transferable commodities. You've alienated the people who actually generated revenue and retained only those who could be bought with promises of promotion. He turned back to face them both. Mitchell Strategic Solutions will fail because it's being run by people who fundamentally don't understand the business they're trying to operate. I don't need to destroy it. I just need to wait. Brett was staring at him with undisguised hatred. You think you've won? I think I've survived. That's more than most people manage when they're betrayed by everyone they trusted. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Tomorrow morning, Phoenix Strategic Group announces its expansion into East Coast markets. We've signed partnership agreements with firms in New York, Boston, and Miami. Our client base now extends from Seattle to Manhattan. Victoria gasped. You said you'd respect territorial boundaries. I said I'd respect legitimate competitive boundaries. Nothing about Mitchell Strategic's current operations is legitimate. Rob walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Victoria? I filed for divorce. Sarah Kim will be serving you papers tomorrow morning. I'm citing irreconcilable differences, though we both know the real reason. Rob, wait. There's nothing left to wait for. He left them sitting in the ruins of their conspiracy, two people who'd thought they were chess masters discovering they'd been playing checkers. Outside, Rob sat in his car for a moment, looking back at the house that had never really been his home. Tomorrow, he'd move into a downtown condo that overlooked Elliott Bay. He'd wake up alone for the first time in 5 years and feel genuinely happy about it. The war was over. Now he could focus on building something worthy of the victory. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. 3 months later, Rob stood in Phoenix Strategic Group's new headquarters, a gleaming office suite on the 40th floor of the Columbia Tower with panoramic views of Seattle and beyond. The company had grown to 60 employees and $75 million in annual revenue, surpassing Mitchell Strategic's peak performance in less than half the time. The transformation had been ruthless and efficient. Former Mitchell Strategic employees continued to defect weekly, drawn by higher salaries, better working conditions, and the chance to work for a company that valued competence over politics. Rob had instituted a simple rule. Anyone who wanted to join Phoenix Strategic had to bring measurable value, not just grievances about their former employer. Marcus knocked on Rob's office door. The final Mitchell Strategic reports just came in. Rob looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing expansion plans for their new Chicago office. How bad is it? Worse than we projected. Revenue down 68%, 12 major clients terminated, staff turnover at 80%. Marcus placed a folder on Rob's desk. They're hemorrhaging money. Rob flipped through the financial documents his contact at Silverman and Associates had quietly provided. The numbers told a story of complete organizational collapse. Victoria's leadership had been as disastrous as Rob had predicted. She'd alienated clients with her inexperience, driven away talented employees with Brett Sullivan's toxic management style, and burned through cash reserves trying to maintain operations without sufficient revenue. What about Ted Harrington's investment? Gone. He put in another $3 million trying to stabilize operations, but it's like pouring water into a sinking ship. Rob felt no satisfaction in the destruction of his former company. If anything, he felt sad for the employees who'd been caught in the crossfire and the clients who'd suffered through the transition period. Any word on Sullivan? That's where it gets interesting. Marcus sat down, his expression grim. Sullivan bailed out last month, withdrew all his capital, and dissolved the partnership. Left Victoria holding the debt. All of it. All of it. Turns out the acquisition agreement was structured to make Victoria personally liable for operational shortfalls. When the company couldn't meet its financial obligations, the debt transferred to her. Rob studied the documents more carefully. Brett Sullivan had been even more calculating than Rob had realized. The man had positioned himself to profit whether the acquisition succeeded or failed, leaving Victoria exposed to catastrophic financial liability. How much debt? $14 million and climbing. Ted Harrington is reportedly furious. Word is, he's cut Victoria off completely. Rob leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. Victoria wasn't just facing professional failure. She was facing personal bankruptcy and family disgrace. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim. Divorce proceedings complete. All assets properly divided per prenup. Victoria requesting meeting to discuss settlement. Rob showed the message to Marcus. What do you think she wants? Probably to beg for help. Or to blame you for destroying her life. Her life destroyed itself. I just refuse to go down with it. That evening, Rob met Victoria at a quiet restaurant in Ballard, neutral territory where they could speak privately without causing a scene. She looked haggard in a way that expensive clothes couldn't disguise. The confident woman who'd sat beside him at board meetings had been replaced by someone who looked defeated and desperate. Thank you for coming, she said as Rob sat down across from her. You said it was important. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she reached for her water glass. I wanted to apologize. For everything. Apology noted. Rob, I know you hate me, but I need help. What kind of help? Mitchell Strategic is going under. The debt is crushing. I'm going to lose everything. The house, my trust fund, probably my relationship with my family. Rob ordered wine. A modest Pinot Noir rather than the expensive bottles they'd once shared. What does that have to do with me? You're the only person who really understands the business. If you came back, even temporarily, you could turn it around. Rob almost laughed. Victoria, you voted me out of my own company, stole my clients, and tried to destroy my professional reputation. Now you want me to save you from the consequences. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane. That's not fair. We've built a life together. You've built a life. I've been funding it. Monday morning brought the first sign that Victoria's victory might be Pyrrhic. Rob went to his old office, now officially owned by Sullivan and Associates, to collect his personal belongings. Victoria, in her new role as CEO, was already behind his former desk. The lockout was unnecessary, Rob said, noting the changed security codes. I would have transitioned everything professionally. Brett thought it was best to ensure a clean break. Victoria's tone was trying for businesslike, but Rob heard the uncertainty underneath. How's your first day as CEO going? Victoria's smile was strained. Well, there are some adjustments to make. A few clients seemed confused about the transition. Rob nodded sympathetically while knowing exactly what those adjustments were. Morrison Hotel CEO had called that morning, furious about being told their consulting agreement had been transferred to Sullivan and Associates without consultation. 3 other major clients had similar reactions. I'm sure you'll work it out. You're very good at managing relationships. Rob, about Friday, maybe we moved too fast. The board might be willing to reconsider if you're open to negotiation. What kind of negotiation? Well, Phoenix Strategic and Mitchell Strategic could coexist. Serve different market segments. There's room for both companies. Rob pretended to consider this while marveling at her audacity. Even now, she was trying to manipulate him. That's an interesting thought. I'll consider it. Hope flickered in Victoria's eyes. Really? I said I'd consider it. I didn't say I'd do it. Rob left the building carrying a single box of personal items and feeling lighter than he had in years. By noon, he was in Phoenix Strategic's temporary offices, a modest suite in Bellevue that felt more like home than the luxury high-rise he'd just abandoned. Marcus was fielding calls from confused clients. Tom was setting up new financial systems, and Jennifer was reviewing the legal implications of their mass exodus. The energy was electric, the feeling of people building something meaningful rather than playing corporate politics. How bad is it over there? Marcus asked during a brief break. Worse than they probably realize. Victoria is trying to manage clients she's never actually worked with, using systems she doesn't understand, supported by staff who don't respect her. And Sullivan? Probably realizing that buying a consulting firm without its consultants is like buying a restaurant without recipes or chefs. That assessment proved accurate. By Wednesday, Rob was receiving calls from former employees at Mitchell Strategic, looking for opportunities at Phoenix. By Friday, Brett Sullivan had reached out directly, requesting a meeting. They met at a neutral location, an upscale bar in downtown Seattle where both men could maintain their dignity while negotiating. Sullivan was everything Rob had expected, smooth, confident, used to winning through intimidation and superior resources. This situation has gotten out of hand, Sullivan began without preamble. We need to find a way to coexist. Do we? From where I sit, things are working out perfectly. You've poached our clients, stolen our staff, and damaged our reputation. That's not sustainable business practice. Rob sipped his whiskey, a 20-year-old Macallan that cost more than many people made in a day. Brett, you tried to steal my company and sleep with my wife. I'm not sure you're in a position to lecture me about business ethics. Sullivan's jaw tightened. My relationship with Victoria started after your marriage was already over. Interesting. When exactly did my marriage end? Because I don't remember being informed. Look, we can keep destroying each other, or we can find a solution that works for everyone. What did you have in mind? A non-compete agreement. You take the West Coast clients, we take the East Coast. Clean geographical separation. Rob laughed. You're asking me to limit my business to protect yours? After you orchestrated a hostile takeover of my company. I'm asking you to be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm letting you keep the company name and the office lease. Everything else was never really yours to begin with. Sullivan leaned forward, his polished exterior slipping slightly. You're making a mistake, Mitchell. I have resources you don't. I can make your business very difficult. Is that a threat? It's a reality. I have connections with major corporations, relationships with acquisition firms, influence with regulatory bodies. I can shut you out of markets you've never even considered. Rob finished his whiskey and stood up. Brett, you just made the same mistake Victoria and her father made. You assumed I got where I am through luck or charm or connections. You assumed I wouldn't fight back when attacked. And now you're about to learn what happens when someone tries to take something from a man who's already lost everything once and rebuilt it from nothing. Rob left money on the table and walked away, leaving Sullivan alone with his threats and diminishing options. The real trap, however, was still being set. That evening, Rob had dinner with Victoria at their house, a meal that felt like a wake for their marriage. How was your meeting with Brett? She asked, confirming that she knew about it. Productive. We discussed territorial boundaries for our respective businesses. Victoria's relief was visible. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I'm being practical. Fighting over market share hurts everyone. So you'll stay out of our core business areas? I'll respect legitimate competitive boundaries. What Victoria didn't know was that Rob's definition of legitimate was very different from hers. While she thought he was agreeing to limit Phoenix's strategic scope, he was actually confirming that she had no legitimate claim to the clients, contracts, and relationships that formed the real value of their former company. Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course. When did you decide our marriage was over? She froze, fork halfway to her mouth. What do you mean? You told your father I was too dumb for this business. You've been planning to vote me out for months. You're sleeping with another man. I'm just curious when you made the decision that we were finished. Victoria set down her fork and looked directly at him for the first time in weeks. Rob, I never wanted our marriage to end. I wanted it to evolve. Into what? Into something more balanced. You built something amazing, but you were never going to grow it beyond a certain point. You're too attached to controlling every detail. So you decided to control me instead. I decided to help you reach your potential. Rob nodded slowly. And Brett was part of that help. Brett understands business in ways you don't. Strategic partnerships, market positioning, scaling operations. Is that what you call it when you sleep with him? Strategic partnership? Victoria's composure finally cracked. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Victoria. Fair would have been you talking to me about your concerns. Fair would have been you asking for a larger role instead of staging a coup. Fair would have been you ending our marriage before starting another relationship. I tried to talk to you. You never listened. Victoria leaned forward, desperation clear in her eyes. I'll give you controlling interest. 70% ownership. You can restructure however you want. And why would I want controlling interest in a failing company with $14 million in debt? Because you could merge it with Phoenix Strategic. Combine the resources, eliminate the competition. Rob sipped his wine, considering her proposal with the same analytical detachment he'd use for any business decision. Victoria, Mitchell Strategic has no resources left to combine. No clients worth pursuing, no employees worth retaining, no assets beyond furniture and office leases. Merging with it would be like Phoenix Strategic buying an anchor. But the name recognition is associated with failure now. Every major corporation in the Pacific Northwest knows that Mitchell Strategic collapsed under your leadership. Victoria's composure finally broke completely. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to speak. Rob, I'm desperate. Brett took everything and disappeared. My father won't return my calls. I'm going to lose the house, and the bankruptcy will destroy any chance I have of rebuilding. Where's Brett now? I don't know. He moved back to Portland and won't answer my calls. I heard he's starting another acquisition fund with the money he pulled out of Mitchell Strategic. Rob felt a flash of genuine anger, not at Victoria, but at Sullivan. Whatever Victoria's faults, she'd been manipulated by someone with far more experience in corporate predation. Victoria, did you read the acquisition agreement before you signed it? Brett explained it to me. Dad's lawyers reviewed it. Did you personally read every clause? Victoria's silence was answer enough. The debt assumption clause. Did you understand that you'd be personally liable if the company couldn't service its obligations? Brett said it was standard language. That successful companies never triggered those clauses. Rob shook his head. Victoria, you were set up. Sullivan structured the deal to make himself wealthy whether the acquisition succeeded or failed. If it succeeded, he'd profit from the growth. If it failed, he'd recover his investment plus interest while you absorbed the losses. You're saying he planned for the company to fail? I'm saying he didn't care whether it succeeded or failed, as long as he profited either way. Victoria stared at him in horror as the full scope of her manipulation became clear. What can I do? Rob finished his wine and stood up. You can declare bankruptcy, try to salvage what personal assets the court allows you to keep, and start over. That's it. You won't help me. Victoria, you made choices. You chose to betray our marriage, conspire against me, and trust someone who was obviously using you. I'm not responsible for the consequences of those choices. But you could help me. You have the resources. I have the resources because I made different choices. I chose to build something new rather than try to steal something existing. I chose to compete honestly rather than manipulate board votes. I chose to end our marriage with dignity rather than drag it through years of litigation. Rob placed money on the table to cover their drinks. Victoria, I genuinely hope you find a way to rebuild your life. But that rebuilding can involve me, and it can't come at the expense of what I've created. So this is it. 5 years of marriage means nothing. Rob looked at her one final time. Really looked at her, trying to find some trace of the woman he'd fallen in love with at that charity gala. 5 years of marriage meant everything to me. That's why your betrayal was so devastating. But those 5 years are over now, and I'm not going to sacrifice my future to fix your past. He walked away without looking back, leaving Victoria alone with the consequences of her ambition. Outside, Rob breathed deeply of the salt air blowing in from Puget Sound. Tomorrow, Phoenix Strategic would announce its acquisition of 3 smaller consulting firms, expanding their capabilities into new market segments. Next month, they'd open offices in Denver and Austin. Victoria had wanted him to be more ambitious, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever it took to win. She'd gotten her wish, just not in the way she'd expected. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 1 year later, Rob stood in the penthouse conference room of Phoenix Strategic Group's new Los Angeles office, looking out at the sprawling cityscape while waiting for his 3 p.m. meeting. The company had grown beyond his wildest projections. 150 employees across 8 cities, $200 million in annual revenue, and a client roster that included Fortune 100 companies from every major industry. More importantly, Phoenix Strategic had developed a culture that Rob was genuinely proud of. They promoted based on merit, rewarded innovation, and treated employees as valuable assets rather than disposable resources. The company's employee satisfaction scores were the highest in the industry, and their client retention rate was above 90%. Marcus entered the conference room with 2 other executives, Jennifer Park, now Phoenix Strategic's general counsel, and Alex Chun, no relation to Morrison's CEO, their new chief technology officer who'd revolutionized their service delivery systems. The Hartwell Industries presentation is ready, Marcus announced. Though I still think you should let someone else handle this one. Rob smiled. Marcus, we've been through this. Hartwell is too important a client to delegate. It's not about the client. It's about what happens if Victoria shows up. That was the complication. 3 months ago, Rob had learned that Victoria was working for Hartwell Industries as a mid-level marketing coordinator, a dramatic fall from her previous position, but apparently steady employment that had helped her avoid complete financial ruin. The bankruptcy had wiped out most of her debts, but it had also destroyed her reputation in Seattle's business community. Rob had debated whether to pursue Hartwell as a client. knowing the potential for awkwardness. In the end, business won out over personal history. Hartwell needed strategic consulting for their international expansion, and Phoenix Strategic was the best firm for the job. If she shows up, we'll handle it professionally, Rob said. This is about Hartwell's business needs, not our personal history. The meeting began promptly at 3 p.m. with Hartwell's executive team. CEO Janet Morrison, a woman who'd built her industrial supply company from a single warehouse into a billion-dollar operation. CFO David Park, and their head of international operations, Michael Stevens. Rob presented Phoenix Strategic's expansion strategy with the confidence that came from having executed similar plans successfully dozens of times. They'd identified target markets in Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, developed partnerships with local firms, and created implementation timelines that balanced aggressive growth with manageable risk. Your proposal is impressive, Janet Morrison said when Rob finished. But I have concerns about cultural integration challenges in the Asian markets. That's a valid concern, Rob replied, which is why we're recommending a phased approach with local partnerships rather than direct market entry. The discussion continued for another hour, covering financial projections, regulatory challenges, and competitive analysis. Rob could see that Hartwell's executives were impressed. They asked detailed questions that suggested genuine engagement rather than polite interest. As the meeting wound down, Janet Morrison stood up. Mr. Mitchell, we're prepared to move forward with your proposal. I'll have our legal team begin drafting the service agreement. Excellent. We can have our implementation team on site next week. Actually, there's one more thing. I'd like you to meet with our marketing coordinator who'll be supporting this project. She has extensive experience with international market research. Rob's stomach tightened as he realized where this was heading. The conference room door opened, and Victoria walked in. She looked different, older, more subdued, dressed in a conservative business suit rather than the designer clothes she'd once favored. Her hair was shorter, her makeup understated, her entire demeanor reflecting someone who'd learned hard lessons about the real world. Rob, she said quietly, her voice carefully professional. Victoria. Janet Morrison looked between them with obvious curiosity. You two know each other? We've worked together before, Rob said smoothly. Victoria has excellent insights into market dynamics. The awkwardness was palpable, but both Rob and Victoria maintained their professional composure as they discussed project details. Victoria's contributions were actually valuable. She'd clearly learned a great deal about international marketing during her time at Hartwell, and her questions about Asian consumer behavior were sophisticated and relevant. After 30 minutes, the meeting ended with handshakes and promises to begin implementation planning. As Hartwell's executives filed out, Victoria lingered. Could we talk privately for a moment? She asked. Rob nodded to Marcus and Jennifer, who left them alone in the conference room. I wanted to thank you, Victoria said when they were alone. For what? For not sabotaging this opportunity. I know you could have told Janet about our history, about the divorce, about everything that happened. Rob leaned against the conference table. Victoria, your employment situation has nothing to do with me. If Hartwell wants to hire Phoenix Strategic and you happen to work there, that's just a coincidence. Is it? You could work with any company in the world now. Choosing Hartwell feels like what? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Like you wanted to see what became of me. Rob considered this. Maybe I did. Are you happy there? I'm grateful. It's honest work, decent pay, and Janet Morrison treats employees fairly. After everything that happened, that's more than I expected. What happened to Brett? Victoria's expression hardened. He disappeared back to Portland with about $8 million and started a new acquisition fund. I heard he's doing well for himself. And you've had no contact with him? He made it clear our relationship was purely transactional. Once the transaction failed, I had no value to him. Rob felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. Whatever Victoria had done to him, she hadn't deserved to be used and discarded like a business asset. Victoria, I'm sorry that happened to you. No, you're not. And you shouldn't be. I made choices that hurt you, and I paid the price for those choices. That doesn't mean I wanted to see you destroyed. Victoria looked out the window at the Los Angeles skyline. For what it's worth, I understand now why you built Phoenix Strategic the way you did. I've learned what it's like to work for someone who values results over relationships. Janet Morrison actually cares about her employees as people, not just profit centers. Is that why you stayed? That's why I'm trying to rebuild. Not just my career, but my character. Rob studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or false emotion. Instead, he saw something he'd rarely seen during their marriage: genuine humility. Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course. When we were married, were you ever actually happy? Or was it always about positioning for something better? Victoria considered the question seriously. I was happy in moments. When you'd come home excited about landing a new client. When we'd travel somewhere beautiful. When you'd surprise me with something thoughtful. But I was also always aware that our life could be more. More what? More prestigious. More connected. More secure. She paused. I grew up in a family where love was conditional on success. My father only approved of me when I was achieving something he valued. I think I projected that onto our marriage. You thought I'd only love you if you were successful? I thought success was the only thing that mattered. That if I could make us more powerful, more wealthy, more influential, then everything else would fall into place. Rob nodded slowly. And now I know that success without character is just elaborate failure. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes. Two people who'd once shared everything and now shared only history. Rob, I know this is probably pointless, but I want you to know, I'm genuinely sorry for what I did to you. Not just sorry that it didn't work out, but sorry that I betrayed someone who'd never been anything but good to me. Thank you for saying that. Will you be able to work with Hartwell knowing I'm there? Rob smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shared with Victoria in over a year. Victoria, I think I can handle seeing my ex-wife occasionally in a professional context. We're both adults who've moved on with our lives. Have you? Moved on, I mean. I've moved forward. I have a company I'm proud of, work that challenges me, and relationships built on mutual respect rather than convenience. Rob paused. Have you? I'm learning to. It's harder than I expected, building a life based on who I actually am rather than who I thought I should be. But you're doing it. I'm trying. Rob extended his hand. Then I wish you luck with it. Victoria shook his hand, her grip firm and professional. Thank you. And Rob? Phoenix Strategic is everything you dreamed Mitchell Strategic could be. You should be proud. I am. As Victoria left the conference room, Rob remained by the window, reflecting on the conversation. A year ago, he'd been consumed with anger and betrayal. 6 months ago, he'd felt only cold satisfaction at Victoria's downfall. Today, he felt something different: peace. Marcus returned to the conference room. How did that go? Better than expected. I think we can work with Hartwell without complications. And Victoria? Rob gathered his presentation materials. Victoria's not my problem anymore. She's not my responsibility, she's not my enemy, and she's not my concern. She's just someone I used to know who happens to work for a client. That's very zen of you. It's very practical of me. Carrying anger is like carrying debt. It limits your options and costs you opportunities. As they left the Los Angeles office, Rob felt the weight of the past year lifting completely. He'd built Phoenix Strategic not just as revenge against those who'd betrayed him, but as proof that he could create something better than what he'd lost. The company now employed people who'd never heard of Mitchell Strategic or Victoria Harrington. They cared about quarterly results and client satisfaction, not corporate drama from Seattle. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim. Morrison Hotels just signed a 5-year extension worth $50 million. Congratulations on officially becoming unstoppable. Rob smiled and forwarded the message to his leadership team. Tonight, they'd celebrate another victory. Tomorrow, they'd start planning the next expansion. After everything that had happened, the betrayal, the divorce, the corporate warfare, Rob had learned something valuable. The best revenge wasn't destroying those who'd hurt you. The best revenge was building something so successful that their betrayal became irrelevant. Victoria had wanted him to be more ambitious, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever it took to win. In the end, she'd been right about everything except who would benefit from those qualities. Rob walked out into the California sunshine, already planning Phoenix Strategic's next phase of growth. Behind him, the past was finally where it belonged, in the past. The future belonged to him now, and he intended to make it spectacular.